I was born and raised in Palestine, in the West Bank's biggest city, Hebron. These restrictions, these suffocating series of permits, which is really an expression of occupation, is what guides me and what drives me here to work with communities across Toronto and Ontario. Leila is a very interesting space. We focus on young people, racialized young people, Indigenous and Black youth, struggling with justice, education, and child welfare. In the West Bank, Israeli violence in the last 2 years has been so brutal and has resulted in the death of more than 250 Palestinians. The only consistent thing in the area is the Israeli occupation. At the heart of the work we do is to provide a sense of justice and belonging to communities that feel outside of the protection of justice. We have to do exactly the same thing for every single human and others who are feeling this in Sudan, in Congo, and other places around the world where people, rights have been trampled on. I think that's the road to full liberation for all. I was born and raised in Palestine, in the West Bank's biggest city, Hebron, and Khalil in Arabic. I am one of 13 kids, so my parents have 13 of us, 8 boys and 5 girls. So I grew up in a very vibrant, beautiful setting with family and cousins. I grew up in a place where diversity meant that you have classmates who are not cousins. So everybody was really the same. So I grew up in a place that is really distinctly dissimilar to Toronto. But it was a place of love because family was everywhere. But at the same time, when you realize that you were in Hebron, which is the epicenter of the Arab-Israeli conflict, you realize how tough it is to be a Palestinian, and the sense of injustice that continues to really be an influencer in everything I do in my life, because Hebron is a place where injustice really comes in so many forms, and the occupation interferes in every aspect of your life. So that continues to be with me, although I've been here since 1988. The earliest memory is really the family, being part of a very large, vibrant family with chaos and dysfunction, love, and incredibly delicious food of all kinds, and really loving parents, grandparents. A beautiful, vibrant old city that is today is a ghost town. But my memories of that, when I take my kids to Hebron and tell them, when we walk the empty, abandoned alleyways and souk and beautiful old market, I tell them in the past when I walked these streets and these alleyways, it was bustling with people going about their lives before the occupation has interrupted and made it into the ghost town that it is today. Once you step outside the street, there could be a checkpoint asking you where you're going and how and who you are and where do you live and what's your address and why you're here. Go into the market, go into the school. You could be experiencing an interrogation from an 18-year-old soldier pointing both fingers and guns at you, asking you questions. This is being in your own street, in your own town, in your city, going about your life, whether it's going to school or going to fetch groceries for your mom. It's the mundane aspects of everyday life that becomes so interrupted, so brutally interfered with, that makes everything is inconvenient. So they make life very, very uncomfortable and inconvenient. So they would block a street. It's as simple as just putting a roadblock. But what that means is that people have to go around and have to cross and jump fences and things to get to the other side. And they've been doing that for so many years, for as long as I remember. So the very basics of day-to-day life is really interfered with by the presence of the Israeli occupation in your face at all times, everywhere. that continues to be the case today.
And how did you and your family deal with that or cope with that? Was there anything you could do growing up?
So there's nothing you could do other than being told how to make sure that when you come face to face with a brutal, sadistic soldier, is what you do to just avoid any further escalation. Just oblige, show your ID card, or answer the questions and just go about. Don't argue, don't, because there's no point of arguing and saying, why are you doing this? This is so unfair and so unjust. Because they know it's so unfair and unjust. They're present there to make your life harder. It's very sadistic expression. Occupation does that. It's intentional at making life very hard. So the mechanism by which we cope with is your parents train you to respond, to oblige. I mean, it sounds like you're being meek, but it's not. It's really a mechanism of survival, and that's why we have survived and continue to survive occupation that has lasted for well over 75 years. I remember vividly there are some known, aunties in the neighborhood who would say, okay, be careful, they're setting up something, come through this, and they'll show you the way. But everybody is trained to look out and tell you how to avoid and how to do this. So everyone is exposed to it. We have seen our parents being asked to turn around, put your hand on the wall and spread your leg, and just wait. And you'll see a wall of people like that. So, and it's been a practice as long as I remember, and as long as the occupation has existed, it goes hand in hand with that.
What was that journey like for you coming to Canada?
The travel is very limited, and for residents of the West Bank like me, you have to get a permit to leave.
Right.
So, the life of an average Palestinian is completely controlled by a series of permits and licenses and papers that allows you to move from one place to the other. So for young Palestinians who want to leave the West Bank, and usually the only way to go outwards through Jordan is to get a permit. So you actually have to go to line to the civil administration of the Israeli occupation headquarters in Hebron, and they give you the permit to leave. It's not the most straightforward process, but you cannot leave without it. I mean, I'll spare you the details of what you go through in order to get it. And you get that. And once you're out there, you have to renew it every year. And which means you have to go back. So being a student here, I have to worry about renewing my residency in the West Bank, a place that I was born and raised. My family's been there for hundreds and hundreds of years, yet I still needed a letter from the university. I enrolled at York University after finishing a language school at a school here in Toronto, which is still around. It's called Hansa Language Center, which was a great experience. I met a bunch of people. Some of them continue to be my friends. But we needed to get that paper, say that I'm enrolled, good standing. My father would take it to the civil administration, that's really the occupation's headquarters, and they'll renew it. And they'll allow me to be away. I still have those sets of papers. So I made it to Canada, so to say. It's been an incredible journey, a journey that continues to be not only reminded by what got me here and how, but influenced and shaped by the values that drives me, that I am connected to a family that has endured suffering, but has thrived and excelled at so many things under these circumstances. So that provides me with motivation, but also with the safety that there is a loving family that is considering everything that they're going through day after day. They continue to thrive, they continue to build, they continue to have kids and weddings and beautiful feasts. And when we go there, it's the highlight of my kids' summer vacations.
So you are allowed to go back then. Is it because you maintained your residency over? Oh, okay. So each year, are you still applying every year?
No, that's it.
Okay.
Now it's, things have finished a little bit, changed a little bit, but I still have to maintain that valid status and have to renew it, and they'll tell me when to renew it and how to renew it. So, but I still have to hold it at all times. So this is my ID card.
Okay.
You can see there's some Arabic, but it's in Hebrew, and that's not even my language, right? But
Oh, okay.
to the occupation is they give you even your own paper in a language that is not yours. There's nothing wrong with learning some other people's language, but it's language of love and language of giving and language of support.
Yeah.
So this is the last permit that I have that allows me to leave the West Bank, but it also allows me to come back. Now, Israelis don't have to do that. It doesn't matter what it is, if people don't like the word appetite, but there is a different system. Palestinians have to hold this, walking the same streets, entering the same gates as an Israeli doesn't have to do it. So I don't know what you want to call this system, but that's the system that we continue to work with. So these restrictions, these suffocating series of permits, which is really sadistic powers that the Israelis have over all Palestinians, an expression of occupation, is what guides me and what drives me in my here to work with communities across Toronto and Ontario. So it really is all connected. I've been very fortunate in my professional career as I finished university here. My first job was with the Canadian Arab Federation, which was a national umbrella organization representing Canadians of Arab origin. It was an advocacy, community organizing, media and government relations organization. My first job was a race relations officer, which was really an interesting experience because I got to learn more about people's challenges and the issues and the cases that I dealt with was around wrongful dismissal from employment for one reason or the other, housing and accommodations, issues with status, immigration and things. So it really provided me with a very extensive range of people's challenges. Some of it is based on blatant cases of discrimination in the case of housing and employment. Others, really some incompetent services and support and advice that they got from friends and families that didn't work out in cases of immigration and refugee status. But all of that to say is that really provided me with an idea of what people really go through on a regular basis. So it provided me with an understanding, or at least a realization that maybe this is the kind of work I wanted to do. I really didn't know what I was getting into. And then 2 years later, the role of the executive director of the Canadian Arab Federation became open, and I considered the application and I went through an interview process and I got it, and I became the national executive director, and it was one of the most interesting and challenging and rewarding experiences of my life because it happened that 9/11 happened while I was the executive director. So I was all of a sudden catapulted to the role of spokesperson for an entire community that was feeling under siege.
Right.
And it was tough times. So you had, every time you present in an interview and radio, television, you have to start with that you are condemning and you are not this and you're not that. So that at the same time you're really expressing the anxiety and the fear of an entire community. That was the midst of and the highlight of my career at the Canadian Arab Federation. And then following that, I became director at Catholic Cross-Cultural Services, which is a settlement service organization here in Toronto, which I felt really that was my calling. I loved the work, providing support for communities, newcomer communities, settlement and adaptation and integration services for families who are coming to find a new life, a new paths, new opportunity for them in Canada. So I moved within that world and I became the executive director of Thorncliffe Neighborhood Office, which is a large settlement neighborhood organization, which till this day continues to be the highlight of my career, working in a neighborhood, in a play space to really connect with communities and provide supports and services for people who really need it the most. But at all times, always I'm reminded by my own community, my own growing up experiences of the power of a community who's provided me the support that I needed without really knowing. We didn't have an agency in Hebron that supports, because you had service providers at all turns. You had people looking out for you. You had people feeding you if you're going out, and your aunties. I tell my kids those stories as I walk my old neighborhood in Hebron and tell them this Abed, used to bake the most delicious fresh bread, and she would just make sure that we have a piece fresh to break it, bake a piece of bread and hand it to me and my cousins or my siblings, and then we'll just go across, and then we'll be emusive. Oh my God, she did the best dips, which is the Enab, the grapes, molasses, and you just dip with that. So it's heaven. So all of that really contributed to well-being, to supporting, and to providing, an environment of support and of love that positioned me and made me recognize the need for that at every stage of my life. So I'm reminded of those stories, and I continue to tell them. So being in Thorncliffe, walking the streets of that neighborhood reminded me of that, and I imagined that love from Enab and Yusuf to other people through the services we provided. So those are experiences that continues to inhibit a very important space and place in my heart and mind. From that, I moved to Laidlaw, and Laidlaw is a very interesting space because it's probably the most privileged space is to be able to be part of an organization that has resources and that seeks opportunities to partner with communities who need support and provide these resources. So we focus on young people, racialized young people, indigenous and Black youth struggling with justice, education, and child welfare. So these are very challenging areas that are facing a lot of communities, and we focus on these two communities specifically because they are disproportionately impacted. There's a very high percentage of young people from these communities in the care of the state, in the foster system, in the child welfare system, incarcerated, but also not graduating. So these are very challenging issues that the Laidlaw Foundation, through its modest granting programs, tried to provide resources for young people and their communities and families to respond to and deal and address and have better outcome for young people in these important systems. This will be my 12th year. And that's my longest career. I've never had a job longer than this. 9 years was the longest. And since I've come to Canada, I've always had jobs. I've never really stopped working, but I've moved around, and that's part of where I feel.
Wow. And what has kept you there for 12 years? What has kept you there for so long?
The work that we do, the focus of the foundation, the nature of the issues we work with, and the opportunity to be part of solutions, solutions that improves the livelihood, the well-being of the young people and their communities. So it's these kind of rare positions of influence and in my view, privilege that allows me to continue to imagine my job in this place, that I'm not looking elsewhere. Because that is a place where I think, because resources, opportunities are important conditions for success, for young people to thrive and continue to take their rightful place in society as leaders, not of tomorrow, but of today.
How have you continued to remain connected to your culture?
I often think about what made it possible for me to actually continue to be, proud Palestinian, connected to the community, to my roots, being an Arab Canadian, and really, feeling quite privileged in the work I do, but also very, very proud to be Canadian. I think this society has worked and supported me. This is an imperfect place by any measure, but it's a place where I think someone like me did and found a space and a place to provide, to live freely of the shackle of the occupation, because that took a while for me to get used to that. No one is going to ask me for my ID card. No one is going to get into the bus that I'm riding on to go to my work and say, get out and just pretend to look for something. No one is going to tell me, stand against the wall, your hands up and your legs open. So it took me a while to psychologically that I'm in a place that respects me, accepts me. So, but that allowed me also the freedom of connecting to my roots with pride, with excitement, allowed me to be part of a thriving community, that growing community that really showcased the brilliance of the culture, of its arts, of its theater, of its literature. So it was a place where you can experience all of that very freely and very proudly, compared to the fact that you couldn't do that in the West Bank. We didn't have any theater. We weren't allowed. There are a series of books, like a list of books that are banned. In fact, many of our poets and writers and literary icons been assassinated by the Israelis. They knew that because they've killed many of our artists and many of our creative forces. So here was a place for me to embrace that as I was finding my place in the Canadian society, to embrace my culture and to learn more about it and celebrate it and revel in the joy of liberation theater and freedom literature that the Palestinian cause includes.
What does it feel like for you when you go back to visit your family, because they don't have that same experience that you have?
It is an important reminder that this just cannot. I cannot believe that this injustice continues, because while I'm here and free of it, but the moment I step into the Alembi Bridge and cross the River Jordan to Jericho and then make my way eventually to Hebron, you're reminded at every checkpoint and every stop and every glimpse of an Israeli soldier, because they're everywhere, that this still continues. And I'm not as able to be myself the way I am when I am in Toronto. So it's a reminder that this is tough. So I have to retrain myself and revert back to 35 years ago and completely train myself again to build in the systems of protection that allows me to navigate the brutality of an Israeli soldier pointing fingers and guns at me to go places, or to stop going, or to wait, or to leave the bus, or get out of the taxi and things like that. While I'm here, it feels like a break. When I go there, that's the reality, because it continues to be that. But my siblings, my nieces and nephews now experience.
We've all been pretty exposed to the brutality of genocide over the last couple of years. Is it worse? It
is significantly worse, because in the past, the army was brutal. The Israeli soldiers was sadistic, as I said. They'll drag you, they'll slap you, and then kick you. Does that happen? But as brutal as that sounds, today you don't even have the luxury of that, because they have a policy that is sanctioned at all levels: shoot to kill, do not kill. In the past, because Hebron is a place where Israeli settlers' violence is like open to the world. It's like a full view of the world. They would go into the market, flip the fruits and vegetable stands for farmers, because they just can do that. I've seen it so many times. The army, 35 years ago, they used to pretend to stop them, to say, okay, you shouldn't be doing this. Really, this is bad. And I'll give them like a rap on their hand, and make sure that no Palestinians would just respond. Today, they don't even pretend. They join in. And if anyone dares to stand up and say, why did you do that? They'll get a beating if they're lucky, if not shoot to kill. So in the West Bank, Israeli violence in the last 2 years has been so brutal and has resulted in the death of more than 250 Palestinians. This is a place where Hamas is not a factor. And I grew up under the brutality of the Israeli occupation, where Hamas didn't even exist, because Hamas didn't exist until actually I left. So the occupation, the only thing that is constant is the occupation of those years. And now it has different ways of enforcing the matrix of control. It's a lot more brutal. It's less concerned with international laws, or even the reaction of international outrage, because it seems like it's just so normalized, and there is complicity at all level, but you see in the streets of so many cities around the world a complete realization of how brutal that occupation is and how unfairly the Palestinian story has been told over the years. So, what's the realities on the streets of the West Bank and Gaza are now making its way to audiences here, realizing that this occupation, this whole thing started on October 7th. It started because October 6th really sucked if you were a Palestinian, and every other day since 1948. So that fallacy that this is because of Hamas started, it's just because the occupations predated all of that. The only consistent thing in the Arab-Israeli conflict is the Israeli occupation. There is now a realization that I think from the depth of the Palestinian suffering, born our ability to survive, our ability to thrive, to tell our stories. We continue to tell our story. We continue to have beautiful art and creation and culture that has captivated the imagination of people. Because the question of Palestine today is not only about Palestine, but it is partly, and about the brutality of the occupation, or the last remaining occupation, where one group has suffocating control over the other. But it's about injustice and about the experience of wronging other people's everywhere. So people have recognized their own sufferings in the depth of the savannas and the tips of the the Himalayas and inner city streets across North America and others. The people recognize their own sufferings, racism they experience, brutalities of police in U.S. cities. They've recognized the Palestinian story in their own suffering.
Right.
So that's why indigenous youth have rallied. That's why the solidarity rallies for Palestinians have really represented an incredible, and it was representative of just the entire world come together in one movement. So yeah, from the suffering that we continue to experience, we've managed to tell the world our story despite the incredibly concentrated, intentional effort to silence the voices of Palestinians, their allies, and their sympathizers, and to weaponize anti-Semitism, and to use that as a blunt tool to silence, but not only to that, to actually justify ongoing genocide and occupation. In my view, Palestinians don't have an anti-Semitism problem, they have an Israeli occupation problem. That has to be understood.
Why do you think this occupation has been allowed to go on for 75 plus years?
When you think about it as a human, as a person who's as objective, I understand you think it's outrageous. There is actually no justification for this, no matter where you stand. It's like, why would someone have the right to interfere with my ability to go and visit my mom? It's just like there is no explanation to this. Why there is 20 checkpoints between the River Jordan to Hebron when I get there, and that a journey of 80 miles could take you 16 hours, and it should take no less than 2 hours.
Wow.
So why this continues, I think it's a question that the world really grappling with, and a lot of young people and others who are awakening to this are realizing that how did this go on for so long? While we're seeing it, we're not making up stories. Like, I mean, the Israelis have been bragging about their brutality. They have pictured themselves. They have shared ransacking of Palestinian homes in Gaza on their social media. I mean, one of the most, like heartbreaking images is Israeli soldiers wearing Palestinian women's lingerie on top of their army uniform and sending pictures about it. So it's in full view of the world, yet the world is saying, well, we have to understand there's another side. It continues to be, I think, the moral failure of the world today, is that they continued and allowed in many cases, in many places, certainly in the United States and other countries. I'm talking about leaders and governments. They've actually enabled it. They provided a forum for it. They were cheerleaders for it's kind of shocking to see people actually saying, if you say the word ceasefire, somehow is insulting to another group. It's how did we get to that killing children wrong is becoming offensive to some and make people feel uncomfortable. So while there is a lot to celebrate about the incredible realization of injustices that have been visited upon Palestinians for so many years, that we've seen expressed in an incredible solidarity movement across the globe, but there continues to be in the halls of powers those who enable this at so many levels. I think that at the heart of the work we do is to provide a sense of justice and belonging to communities that feel outside of the protection of the system. We have to do exactly the same thing for every single Palestinian and others who are feeling this in Sudan, in Congo, and other places around the world where people, rights have been trampled on and rights have not respected, and people have been living under conditions of restriction, conditions of they recognizably unjust. That has to be the realization. People have a huge responsibility to make sure this doesn't continue because it's in their name, and their safety doesn't trump that of the Palestinians. The same thing as privileged white communities here have to be the one who are the faces and the voices of addressing injustice, leading the charge for reconciliation and supporting indigenous aspiration and self-determination, ensuring that Black emancipation is a reality, is the responsibility of the dominant the group that have the power. And that's the same in Palestine, in Sudan, in Congo, in North America. And we should take inspiration from the coming together of an incredible force of people power, and without really over romanticizing this. We've seen how incredibly effective the power of people, young people, and all kind of people from across the world when they came together. They have really forced Palestine on the front pages of every meaningful media outlet, which goes to say that we have reasons to be inspired and to take a moment to celebrate that. And I think that's the road to full liberation for all.